Oh, I see somebody's joined the chat.
Hello, hello. You're talking right now. We can't hear you yet.
One moment, please. You got it?
Yep, I
We
can
got
hear
it.
Okay. You should
I
be
can
able
hear
to hear me now. Yeah.
Yeah, Tim,
Yeah.
do me a favor, say go gadget helicopter hat.
Yeah.
Wait,
Go,
me?
go, gadget helicopter hat.
There you
Well,
go. See,
I,
Tim?
yeah, see, but I wasn't the voice of Inspector Gadget. So
Yeah.
Oh my
I was only Corporal Cape Man. Oh, I'll help you, Inspector Gadget. Don't worry.
I
Yeah.
knew
But that was like my favorite character.
What?
Yeah.
Corporal Cape Man was?
Yeah.
Dude, Josh, Cape Man was universally, I didn't know this until a couple of years ago. I just happened to stumble across it online, but it turns out that Corporal Cape Man was universally hated. Like
Oh,
no.
really?
despised. That character was despised. People just, I don't know why, but they just hated that character. I mean, thankfully, I was only in on the last 10 episodes of the series, right?
Oh my goodness. My goodness, we're off to a great start with this interview.
Well, are we going already? Is this it?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, we're starting. We start.
Go.
Well, it's
All
already
right.
starting.
Well, hello.
The first question is a bit more of a basic one, but how did you get started in voice acting, and why voice acting instead of film acting?
Okay. Well, the easy answer to that is I kind of grew up with voice acting ish type stuff in my family and in my home when I was a kid. My parents worked when they were working at NBC in New York at 30 Rock back in the early 50s. And my dad had a job where he was what was he? He was the boss, the manager of the tour division. Okay, so if anybody wanted to take a tour of NBC at 30 Rock in New York, he was the guy who set those tours up for you.
Wow.
He was also the boss of the pages at 30 Rock. So, but his goal while he was working there was he wanted to be an announcer for the network. And back in those days, you actually had to take a class. You had to go through a program that NBC sponsored in order to, if you can believe it, learn how to announce, which was something my dad dearly wanted to do. So he tried getting into that program. He might have even gotten into the program. I don't remember. But long story short, he ended up not being able to get hired as an announcer for the network. And he was very frustrated. And at the time, back in 1953, he was producing the Bob and Ray show. I don't know if you kids have ever heard of Bob and Ray, but they were a very famous comedy team back in the 50s and 60s. So anyway, he moved us out of New York in 1955 when I was only a year old and moved us to Denver, Colorado, where he got a job at a radio station. And my dad was real big into comedy albums. He was big into Stan Freberg and, oh gosh, who else? Tom Lehrer. I mean, so many great comedians from back in the 50s and 60s. And he was also a big fan of audio drama. And so he had, when he was still working at NBC, he was able to score. NBC in their radio studios back in those days, where they were remodeling their studios, and he was able to somehow commandeer an old tape deck from NBC radio studios that accommodated the big 10.5-inch reels. And he took it with us to Denver, and he had a bunch of old tapes of audio dramas and such. And so he was always playing this stuff. Now, I was just a little kid, like 2, 3, 4, 5 years old when we were living in Denver. And I remember Dad playing these audio dramas, and he had a big speaker box sitting on the floor of the den where he had this tape deck. And this box, the speaker box, had one 15-inch speaker in it. Okay, this is back in the days of mono, not stereo. And I would lie on the floor with my ear pressed up against the grill of the speaker box. And I would listen to the old radio dramas, the old audio dramas that he used to play. And I used to love this stuff. And for me, with my, little 3 and 4-year-old imagination, thought that all this was going on, all these people were actually inside this box. And so I was just like fascinated with this stuff, and I wanted to be in this box with them. So that really is where I think, gained my, maybe I was too young to appreciate it, but that's where I gained my awareness, if you will, of, voices and voice acting and audio dramas and different characters and people and stuff. And so growing up with that, my dad always wanted to be an actor too, and that never happened. Well, so he ended up going into a completely different line of work. But as I grew up, I don't know why I was so fascinated with this idea of radio and wanting to be on the radio. So, I remember when I was in fourth grade was when I discovered that I really wanted to be an actor. That's when I saw my first live theater production of Peter Pan. And a friend of mine's big brother was in this production, playing Michael in this production. And I remember they were flying kids and stuff in this theater. And my little fourth grade year old brain was just like, I want to do that. That's me. I totally want to be that. And so that's where my love of theater was born. And I sort of pursued that into high school and then into adulthood, and wanted to go to theater school. When I went to college, my mom wouldn't let me. She said, if I'm going to pay for college for you, you're going to go study something you can get a job in. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, okay. I mean, the only other thing that I could think of that I had any interest at all at that time was architecture. So I actually went to University of Colorado in Boulder to study architecture. Mm-hmm. And that lasted about 2 minutes. And I mean, really, by the end of my first semester, I was already out of that program and spending all my time over at the theater and in the radio studio. So, and I got a little show on this AM radio station just outside of Boulder. And it was kind of cool to actually hear myself on the radio stuff. I wasn't on live. These were little taped interviews and stuff that I was doing, little features that I was doing. And so that kind of got me into that. When I was going to school in Boulder, I was doing a lot of theater. In fact, in my freshman year, I got the lead in a university production.
Wow.
In the second semester of my freshman year, yeah, which was kind of unusual because usually in theater departments at colleges and universities, it's usually the upperclassmen who get all the primo parts, and the freshmen and stuff, if they're lucky to even get a part at all, you're an extra, your background, or probably more accurately, you're working sets, building sets and painting sets and stuff like that. So anyway, that's where all my theater kind of and my radio kind of came together, and quit college after a year and a half. But one of the things that I did while I was at Boulder was I had the foresight to go down to Denver and take the test to get my third class radio license, which back in those days you had to have in order to get a job on the radio, because you had to take transmitter readings. So you had to have a third class radio license, which I got. And the year after I quit college in 74, in early 75, I got my first job on the radio in Cleveland, Ohio, which was my hometown at that point. And so I got a job on the radio working midnight to 6 on weekends. But Cleveland was a main market at the time. And so I just got really super lucky, getting this job on the radio. And then that turned into a full-time gig. And then they ended up getting rid of me after a year and a half or so. And then I went on to work at a second radio station, which in 1976 and 77 was a disco radio station called Disco 92. And then from there, I went on to bigger stations, a big FM rock station after that in Cleveland. I also did morning drive at an AM radio station in Cleveland, Ohio in 78. And then 79, I was at that G98, a big rock station in Cleveland. And then actually tried to quit radio and move to New York to get into theater in New York. And that ended up just not happening. It just wasn't the right time. I was married, a couple of little, very young kids. So then I got back on the radio in Cleveland and worked at that last radio station. I worked there for about 5 years. And at many of the radio stations, well, I shouldn't say many, but 3 of the 5 radio stations I worked at, I was a production director. And so that meant that I was responsible for recording and voicing the local radio spots that we had to do for clients of ours at the radio station. But I was also responsible for getting in these tapes from national ad agencies who were also advertising on our radio stations. And so I would get these tapes and I had to transfer the 30-second spot from this, quarter-inch tape over to what we called a cart, as a cartridge that you just plugged in, and it instantly started. As soon as you hit the button, the commercial started just like that. So that's how we aired them on the radio stations. And so I was responsible for carting up all these national radio spots that came in, which meant that I was hearing these national announcers, these great voices that were coming in. I was listening to those day in and day out. And And so I was starting to incorporate some of that stuff, kind of, and some of my acting background into my voiceover stuff as I was voicing spots for the radio station. It started to work really well because I started getting calls from local ad agencies in Cleveland saying, hey, we want to hire you apart from the radio station to voice a commercial for May Company or Uncle Bill's or, Stop and Shop supermarkets or whoever, these local advertisers. And I said, wow, really? You can hire me like that apart from the radio station in the city? Yeah. And so that's when I discovered the union, AFTRA at the time. And so I joined the union and started working freelance apart from the radio station, doing a lot of this freelance voiceover work. And I had such a great time doing it. I really enjoyed the fact that I was able to make some money on the side apart from the radio station. Because see, when I recorded these these spots for the radio station, I wasn't paid any more money for that. That's just part of my job. So here I was being paid, separate from the radio station to start voicing these commercials. Well, that's where it really started to gel for me. And I went, ding, oh, wow, you can actually make money doing this on the side. And my acting started coming into it as well because I was starting to doing characters on the radio as well. So in my morning shows. And so that's where it all, that's sort of a long-winded answer for, how did you get started in this? But that's where it was born for me. And, before I knew it, I was making more money doing freelance voiceover work apart from the radio station than I was working at the radio station, more money a year. And after a couple of years of doing that, I realized, well, I don't need to be coming in, working 6 days a week, at the radio station when I could be making more money, apart from the radio station, just doing this freelance voice work. So I decided in 1984, after I'd been on the radio for 10 years in Cleveland, that I was done with that. And also, you got to understand at the same time, I was pursuing a lot of theater. I was doing a lot of stage plays. I was doing a lot of musicals. And I was also on the TV at the time. I was going out doing live remotes where I was interviewing bands that came through Cleveland on the local ABC station in Cleveland. And I was also pulling the Ohio lottery numbers on TV every night for 1 minute a night. And I was also doing a lot of modeling. So I was trying to do, I'm print modeling is, and on camera TV commercials. Really what it boiled down to is I was trying to do anything that I could think to do in the entertainment industry in Cleveland. And I finally got to the point where it felt like, man, I'm not going to be able to go much farther than I felt like I'd pretty much soaked Cleveland dry at that point. And it was time to either go to New York or LA. And I was going to go to New York to try and work on Broadway, or I was going to go to LA to try and do TV and film. And so I opted for Los Angeles and moved out there in over Labor Day weekend of 1984 and just moved there pretty much sight unseen. Although I had been there once before, a couple of years earlier, when I got a job hosting a nationally syndicated dance show that was on the air in 1983, late 83 and sort of into 84, went for about a year and a half, called The Dance Show. And we taped those shows in Atlanta every other weekend while I was still on the radio in Cleveland. And then by the time I moved out to LA, that show had ended. But that was the only time I had been to LA before I moved there. And so when we moved, it was crazy. I basically knew two people out here. And one of the gals that I knew, she and I had done some theater in Cleveland together. And so I called her up and I said, do you have any suggestions for what I should do? Because I live here now. And she said, this is great. I'll get you an appointment with my agent, my commercial agent, and one with my husband's commercial agent as well. And I thought, this is fantastic. So again, longish story short, I ended up signing with the agent with her agent. And so I started doing voiceovers with them and started doing on-camera commercials with them. And within 6 months of my moving to LA over Labor Day weekend of 84, in the spring of 85, within a 10-day period in like March, April of 85, I got my first on-camera national network TV spot for Kraft barbecue sauce, which was paying a pretty decent chunk of money. I got my first little part in a movie, and my scene was, when I say little part, I had like 2-3 lines in this thing. But my scene was with Tommy Lee Jones. So it was a pretty crazy, heady experience doing that. And then also within that 10-day time frame, I got my first cartoon series. Inspector Gadget. And that's when I got Corporal Cape Man for that. And I never even thought of doing cartoons before. That just was not on my radar because I moved out there to be on camera, not to do voiceover stuff. But I knew I could do some voiceover stuff because I'd done so much of it back in Cleveland. And I had a really good demo tape when I moved out to LA. So really was how all that started. And I'm telling you, that 10-day, chunk of time in the spring of 85 was what really, but it also taught me some pretty valuable lessons too, because, here I was working with some amazing people. I mean, that first session that I got for Inspector Gadget, I showed up in the studio and there were just 4 of us in the studio that day. There's a guy named Maurice LaMarche, who was the brain on Pinky and the Brain, if you ever saw that, and the voice Alexis for a bunch of years, and just he's on Futurama. He's on so many shows. But he was the voice of Chief Quimby on that, and it was his first cartoon. Then there was Frank Welker, a guy who I'd never even heard of before, but turns out he was like the king of cartoons, and I didn't know it. And he's sitting right next to me. And he was also the voice of Dr. Claw, which blew my mind when he opened his mouth and that voice came out, because he super soft-spoken guy with a voice, it's sort of a little higher, and it's, kind of lives up here and stuff. So when he opened his mouth and out came the, "I'll get you next time, Gadget, next time." I was like, how in the world do you do that? So it was just crazy to me. And then on the other side of me was Don Adams. And, I was a huge fan of Get Smart. And so I was completely starstruck with Don Adams sitting next to me. So that was that was my introduction to cartoons and to voice acting, as opposed to, as being an announcer. And so I started learning a ton just watching these guys. But that's what really lit my fuse in wanting to do more cartoon work. And I had so much fun doing those last 10 episodes of the series that I asked my agent to please send me out on more of those interviews and auditions for cartoon and animation work. And they did. And I just got really super lucky and started, booking shows, booking series after series after series, and then it kind of sort of became my career. Actually, it became a third of my career. I've often thought of my career as being like this stool with 3 legs holding it up. And each of the 3 legs of the stool of my career. That sounds bad. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, no, that doesn't sound good at all. But those 3 legs ended up being just straight voiceover, because I started getting some really great clients. I was the voice of Home Depot for 8 years. I was the voice of Kellogg's Frosted Flakes for a bunch of years. Mattel Hot Wheels, Taco Bell, Colgate toothpaste, a bunch of stuff like that. So just the straight announce stuff was one of those legs. Cartoons ended up becoming a second leg. And then the third leg happened in 1993, when in August of that year, I got this fluke audition to announce a promo. Now get this, okay? Considering what I was telling you about my dad earlier, I got an audition over at NBC.
Oh, wow.
To do a promo for a new campaign they were starting called Must See TV. And I ended up booking this, and they ended up putting the promo on the air that night. And It ended up being the first Must See TV promo. Well, again, another long story short, they ended up keeping me as a voice of Must See TV for 16 years.
Wow.
And so I voiced all those promos from Seinfeld, Frasier, Friends, Mad About You, back in the, sort of early to mid 90s. I launched Friends in 94 or 95. And then 3 months after I started there, they gave me the Tonight Show with Jay Leno.
Wow.
And so I was voicing those promos every night for 16 years, so, and then finally they let me go in 2009 when I was doing the promos for The Office, Community. What was the other big one? The Office and, no, I can't remember. Anyway, I'm completely blanking. Anyway,
Was it?
so what's that?
What year was this? It was
It was 2009. And so
2009. I was thinking Parks and Rec, but that would have
Parks and
been,
Rec.
was it Parks and Rec?
I launched Parks and Rec. Yeah.
Wow.
Community, The Office. Yeah, I launched all those, but they ended up getting rid of me. But listen, 16 years, as the voice of pretty much the comedy voice of the network was just a heck of a lot of fun. And so anyway, that was the third leg of my career. So that's, but in all of this, yeah, I started doing some on-camera commercials when I first moved here, and that lasted for about 5 years. But then I finally realized, and in the very beginning, I got a what we call a theatrical agent. That's for doing movie and TV. And I got a couple of small gigs doing some TV and film. And to be honest, you guys, I realized I didn't like it. I didn't like the process, but I loved the voiceover stuff. All of it, the straight announce, for commercial clients, the promo announce for NBC. And then after NBC let me go, then I went over to ABC, did the same thing over there for 4 or 5 years. And then they let me go, and I ended up going over to Fox for a year or two.
Wow.
Yeah. And then after that, I was also, I don't know if you remember the show, Live with Regis and Kelly.
Hmm.
Regis Philbin and Kelly Ripa. But then
Yep.
when Regis retired and then unfortunately passed away, Kelly was on her own, but then they hooked her up with Michael Strahan. So it was Live with Kelly and Michael. And then Michael went on to Good Morning America. And so then they hooked her up with Ryan Seacrest. So then it was Live with Kelly and Ryan. So I did those promos every day for 17 years. And so my promo career was pretty varied. It wasn't just NBC. And then the third leg of my career, of course, being the cartoons, which I was really lucky to do up until about, I don't remember, sometime in 2010s, maybe up till 2012 or 13, something like that, about 10 years ago. And then, of course, the one that I didn't mention and haven't mentioned yet, but the one that I'm still doing after more than 30 years was Adventures in Odyssey, and for Focus on a Family. And excuse me, I got that gig in 1994 after Hal Smith passed away.
Right.
And he was the original voice of Wit. And they were looking for they were not looking for a new Wit because they realized that they probably wouldn't be able to match him. So they created 2 new characters. One was Jack Allen, who was ostensibly Wit's childhood friend. And that character was voiced by Alan Young, who I knew as Wilbur on Mr. Ed. And was starstruck working with him. And then the other character they created was the character of Wit's son, Jason Whittaker. Now, Jason had actually existed in an episode or 2 years before, but only kind of as a minor character, was my understanding. And so I was good friends with Katie Lee at the time, who was the voice of Connie, of course. And Katie recommended me to them for them to audition me for Jason, which they did. And I just was really blessed to get cast in that, and am still the voice of Jason to this day. Yeah. And that was back in, 1994. Right. So 31 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. So, it's not only my longest running gig, but it's the only gig I'm still doing.
Really?
I mean, I still audition every so often, but I'm largely retired. I don't really push it that much. And I don't do any on camera stuff, and I don't pursue the theatrical stuff. I stopped pursuing the theatrical stuff after just a couple of years after I moved here. I realized it wasn't my thing. So that's it. Okay. So nice talking to you guys. I'll see you. Now that I've told you my life story.
Well, since we're talking about Jason Whittaker, but you mentioned in other podcasts that Name Not a Number is your favorite episode. Why is that? Is it just because it's your first?
It was the first one.
It was the first one, so just the nostalgia of playing.
Yeah. Yeah, name not a number, largely because it was my first one, and memorable to me. I was meeting, these great. Oh, but let me tell you one other thing about the history of Odyssey was that so shortly after Alan, who was Jack Allen, and me as Jason, shortly after we started doing episodes together as these new characters, somebody from up in the Seattle area called Focus and told them that there was a guy on the radio up there who sounded suspiciously like Hal Smith did as Wit. And so they were intrigued. They were able to track this guy down. His name was Paul Herlinger. So when they got him on the phone, they just sent chills up their spines because it it sounded so eerily like Hal did. And so they brought him down to LA to audition, and they pretty much booked him on the spot. So he became the second voice of Wit and was the voice of Wit for many years until unfortunately he passed away. And then that's when they got Andre Stoika, who's the current voice of Wit now. So yeah, so I started working on Odyssey and really fell in love with it. I was not really aware of it. I mean, I was aware of it only by way of Katie, but I had never heard it. I hadn't listened to it. And so when I got it, I started listening to some back episodes to, try and get a sense of what the show was about. Just fell in love with the writing, fell in love with the production. The production team on Adventures in Odyssey is just hands down stellar and probably some of the best I've ever heard. I mean, it makes the show to me truly magical, when you listen to it and, with the music, the music, the sets, the costumes, but the sound effects and, the Foley and all that. And of course the voice acting. And so, yeah, it's just been a really special show to work on, but also not least because the message that we're able to put out there and really try and uplift, first of all, sort of illuminate the word of God, in a radio drama format, which I think is really cool, but not in a way that clubs people over the head with it. But they're really they're fun stories to listen to. Sometimes they're really intriguing and suspenseful. Other times they're just flat out hilarious. You get Jess Harnell on almost any project you work on, and it's going to be hilarious. Jess is just, he's a magician all by himself. So they're really engaging. It's really an engaging show to listen to. So I've been impressed with it, right from the very start when I first started listening to it. Anytime I, take the time to listen to an episode, it has never lost its magic to me. And that's really something to say for a show that now is pushing 40 years old.
What has been some of the most difficult scenes that you've had to play as Jason Whittaker?
Oh, goodness. I was afraid you were going to start asking stuff like that.
Oh, no.
No. So some of the scenes that have been tough have been some of the emotional scenes, that really deal with some tough issues. Those can sometimes be hard to play because you want to be real with it. You want to be honest with it. You don't want to be campy. You don't want to overact it. You don't want to be chewing the scenery, as they say. You want to be truthful with it. And sometimes that can be tough as an actor, whether you're on camera or you're a voice actor. It's still acting. You got to act those scenes in a way that doesn't sound or look like you're acting them, but that you're taking these words off the page and doing your best to try and make it really real. And so, there have been times when those have been tough. I will tell you personally, and I imagine that you guys are probably aware of the fact that when Will Ryan passed away, and, Will was the voice of Eugene ever since the very beginning. He was the only voice of Eugene. And Will and I had known each other since 1973.
Oh.
Because this was before I even got on the radio in Cleveland, because Will and I were both from Cleveland. And Will was a radio guy. And he wasn't on the radio as a DJ, but he worked at radio stations. And that's where I met him for the very first time in 1973 at a big radio station that coincidentally, after they changed format a year or two later, became the very first radio station that I worked for. Was the station that when I met Will, I don't remember whether they were either a country station or a top 40 station. I don't recall, but he was the promotions director there. And he introduced me to their program director. And the program director at the time, and this was when I was starting to do that radio stuff out in Boulder, she let me come in after hours and work on making my very first voiceover demo tape and a tape to be a DJ, which is what I wanted to do. I wanted to get into radio. So she let me come in and dummy up a tape to be a DJ to send to little radio stations around to try and get a job in radio. Well, I ended up sending that tape to a place called the Ohio School of of broadcast technique. And the gal who ran that school sent it to a radio station in El Paso, Texas. And this is in 1974, late 74. And she said, I got you a job as the morning guy at this radio station, this little AM radio station in El Paso, Texas. Well, I was married and I had a couple of little kids, and I didn't want to move to El Paso. And actually, no, that's not true. Yeah, I had just gotten married, but I didn't have kids yet. I didn't want to move to El Paso. So I told her, I really appreciate that, but I've decided I want to stay here in Cleveland. She said, well, the chances of getting you a job in a major market in Cleveland like this with no experience is going to be little to none. And I said, well, then so be it. That's going to be the way it is. And then as it turns out, after I got married, my wife's brother-in-law was working. Get a load of this. He got a job as the news director at that same radio station where I met Will the year before,
Wow.
right? And then he told me that he was getting fired in like late 74, early 75, and they were changing format from country, which is what he was doing, to beautiful music. And they were going to hire inexperienced people cheap. And I should go down and talk to this particular guy. And so I called him up, made an appointment, went down, interviewed with this guy, and he hired me. No experience, but I had a third-class radio license. So he hired me to work weekends, midnight to 6. So that's how I got into radio. So I did get into radio in Cleveland at the same radio station I met Will at the same radio station a year later, my future brother-in-law worked at. And then I got the job there in early 75. Oh man, when I think about it like that, it's too weird. So anyway, Will and I kept in touch over the next couple of years that I was in radio. And when I got that job at that disco station in 76, 77, I hadn't seen Will in a couple of years, but I called him up and I said, hey, I need a logo. And I know that you're an artist, which he was. Would you be willing to draw a logo for me? Well, he did. He drew me the coolest logo because guys, don't laugh, please. So I was using my real name on the radio, Townsend Coleman, but I was going by TC. So when I was growing up, there was a cartoon called a Top Cat, and they called him TC. So I called myself TC, Top Cat in the morning. And so he drew me this great logo of this cartoon cat in a circle. And I wish I could show you guys, but in 1977, and I still have the original artwork of this logo, and it's signed in small letters over in this circle. At the bottom of the circle, it says WZ Ryan, 1977. Well, Will used to, Z was not really his middle initial, but he always said it was Zed. And so his name was Will Zed Ryan. And I always thought that was so intriguing because that was a little look into the mind of Will Ryan. He was a really eccentric, unique, just wonderful, wonderful guy. And so then I ran into him a number of years later when I was doing theater in Cleveland, and he had already moved to LA with his bandmate, Phil Barron, and they called themselves the 20th Century Troubadours, I think. And he said, dude, and this was in 1980, this was in early 1984, and I had just quit radio. And he said, dude, Phil and I moved to LA about a year ago, and you belong in LA. I was like, wow, okay. So I kind of took that as a sign a little bit. And then I got the same message from another guy, completely unrelated, about a month later. And so that's why I decided to move to, or at least come out and look in LA instead of New York. Circling back here, Will and I knew each other since 1973. We're good friends. So when I got this gig, thanks to Katie Lee on Adventures in Odyssey, there's Will Ryan on this show. And I couldn't believe it. And I thought, look at this, how we've come sort of this magic full circle in a way. It's mind bending to me. And so all these years later, then when Will passed away, and you got to know how heartbreaking that was when that happened.
Yeah.
For all of us, but certainly for me, when they asked me if I would be willing to voice Eugene's character for the last couple episodes where they were going to kind of wrap up the character of Eugene in Adventures in Odyssey using a certain, and I'll specify this in just a sec because I think it's really kind of important, using a certain kind of AI. I was leery at first because I think that AI is a really scary thing in terms of our industry because of how easy it is for them to be able to rip they being anybody, anybody could rip us off simply by sampling our voice and then putting it through any of these cheap AI tools now. And not just voice, but on camera too. I mean,
Yeah.
it's frightening to me. Although I think that there are some really good use cases for AI, but basically I think it's a really scary thing. And so I was leery of what Focus was trying to do and what the producers of AIO were trying to do. But when they explained to me how it was going to be done, I thought, no, you know what? This is actually a perfect use of it in a case like this. And because here's what they do. They didn't just sample my voice and then type all the put it into the script and have it come out sounding like Will. I actually had to go in and record the episodes of those last few as Eugene, along with Jason, so I had to perform Jason, but I also had to perform Eugene as best I could. Now, you got to understand that I am not a comedian. I am not an impressionist by any stretch of the imagination. I can kind of mimic a little bit. I'm definitely not Will Ryan. Would never pretend to have his smarts and his inventiveness and his creativity and his sense of humor. I mean, all of that was Will. I would never pretend to even come close to that. What I did do, what the producers had to do is they had to put together a 20-minute piece of audio that was just nonstop Will Ryan as Eugene. Okay. With like virtually no breaks in it at all. It was just Eugene's voice, start to finish, for like 20 minutes. And they sent it to an AI outfit, I believe in Ukraine, where they trained their computers on this 20-minute voice track of Will as Eugene. Mm. And what they did was they took my performance, if you can call it that, of Eugene, where I tried to sort of mimic Eugene's kind of sense of timing and inflections on some things and stuff, with a lot of help from the folks at Focus. Dave Arnold was super helpful because he was directing those episodes, and with a lot of help from Dave would give me line readings about, well, how about if you try it like this, and then he would do it, and I would try and mimic him doing Will. Because I think that they had a much better set, having worked with Will for all those years on every episode. They knew his inflections and his timing and his sense of humor and his laugh and all that stuff way better than I did. I just knew Will as my friend, as well as Eugene. So then they took these tracks of my performance as Eugene, sent them over to this outfit in Ukraine. They put it into their computer, and whatever they do, it spit out my performance sounding like Eugene. Right. And wow. Boy, it was uncanny to me. Well, the first time I heard it, I will tell you, I cried. It was a really emotional experience for me. So you ask, what were some of the harder scenes that I've worked on? I mean, those are the ones that pop to mind immediately. I know that probably wasn't what you had intended, but yeah, that was something else, and a super honor to be able to sort of help kind of finalize Eugene's involvement in Odyssey. I think it's the end, but I can't speak to that for sure, because who knows what they might do down the road, but we'll see. Will always used to show up at almost every session with a ukulele. I was going to say his ukulele, but he had probably 20 of them. My favorite one was the one he had that was fashioned out of a cigar box, which is crazy. Yeah, it was pretty interesting ukulele. But he was a musician. He was a Renaissance man in every sense of the word, Will was. He was an artist. He wrote music. One of the most fun projects I ever worked on was an animated version of, it was called Alice Through the Looking Glass. And I played this little character named Tom Fool, and he was like a little court jester. Well, Will wrote all the music. Will was also in this thing, but they had a couple of big stars in it. And I mean, Jonathan Winters was in this, and I'm blanking. I'm sorry. But Will was also in it, but he also wrote all the music for it. So I got to sing 2 songs in this animated version of Through the Looking Glass that Will wrote and directed me on when we did the singing sessions. It was, stuff like that. I mean, I start just flashing back to these times with Will and just how fortunate I was to have not only been a friend of his, but to have gotten to work with him the way I did.
This is not a fair question, but I'm going to ask you. I'm switching gears a little bit. Which ranks higher in terms of your career, Michelangelo from Ninja Turtles or Jason Whittaker?
I'm going to say it's sort of a loaded question because
You
it's
know,
a bit like Sophie's Choice, but it's hard choosing a favorite character of all the characters I've done because they were sort of in a way kind of it's a cheesy answer, but they were kind of all my favorites for different reasons. I would say if I had to pick one, I'd say it was Jason Whittaker just because of what the show means to me in my heart in terms of really having an impact, a positive impact on people in a spiritual sense. Okay. However, what I have discovered, because I do spend a lot of time now going to Comic Cons as a guest, making appearances, and I meet fans all the time of so many of the shows that I've worked on. But you guys, I can't begin to tell you the number. And mostly when I go out with the other three original Ninja Turtle voices and the gal who voiced April O'Neil. And so oftentimes it's the five of us together. So they're turtle centric appearances that I go out and do. And so I meet a lot of Ninja Turtle fans. Well, you got to understand that I don't know how old you guys are, but the fans that we meet, are now between 40 and 45, which is not to say that they're all that age, but that really seems to be, it's like 43, 44, 45 years old is like the key demographic from when Ninja Turtles was on. This is the age group now, and I still call them kids, like I call you guys kids. I still think of them as being, the 8 and 9 year olds who were discovering Ninja Turtles, back in the late 80s. And so I can't tell you guys the number of stories that we have heard over the years about how Ninja Turtles has impacted people's lives in truly life affirming and life-changing ways, and in some cases, life-saving ways. Now, I know that sounds weird, and it's certainly I was going to say it's no thanks to us. I guess it is some thanks to us because we get these thanks from these fans at every single con we go to, and we hear these amazing stories about how if it weren't for the Ninja Turtles, when my parents were splitting up, or I was getting, bullied in third grade, or I was, overweight and couldn't get on the baseball team, whatever it was, that these kids were struggling with in their lives, they turned to Ninja Turtles. And Ninja Turtles, for whatever reason, and we've come to appreciate this now when we didn't appreciate it when we were actually recording these episodes, Ninja Turtles spoke to them in a way that in some cases, and I mean it literally, sincerely, saved their lives. I'll give you one example. I had this guy who was in the military, in the Army, come up earlier this summer, believe it or not, and he handed me a patch that had Velcro on the back. And the patch was just the head of Michelangelo, and it just says, "Cowabunga, it is," on this patch. Well, the patch was ragged and kind of shredded a little bit and really dirty and stuff. And he said, "Mr. Coleman, I just have to tell you that you saved my life, and I have to thank you." And I said, "I saved your life? How?" And he said, "Because I was in the Army, and I was in Iraq and Afghanistan. And when I would go into battle, I wore this patch on my left shoulder. And every time I would go into battle, and there would be heated battles, I never knew if I was going to come out alive or not. And I would put my hand over this patch and I would just thank Michelangelo and just remember, what attitude would Michelangelo have in
Wow.
this situation?" And I just listened to this guy, and he started welling up with tears in his eyes, and I started welling up with tears in my eyes. And I'm going, I never would have imagined back then when we were recording these shows, we would have any sort of impact on a kid in any sort of way. We thought we were just, doing something silly. Well, it's those kinds of stories that we hear so often that I know what Adventures in Odyssey has meant, because I've met so many believers and families, who just love Odyssey and what it means to them and what it's meant to them over the years in their families. But I also hear similar stuff, albeit not in the spiritual realm, from fans of Ninja Turtles. And yet at the same time, I get these fans I did a character called The Tick, which was one of my favorite characters just to perform because it was so outlandish and just out there. It's hard, you guys, for me to pick a fave. But I would say that those two, between Michelangelo and Jason, would be my top two faves for those two reasons. Because of the impact that they've had, and I've heard about the impact impact that they've had on so many people's lives in some pretty profound ways.
I also saw that you voiced characters in Batman or like some side characters in Batman. What was that like?
Yeah, it was great. And they, when you say side characters, you're not kidding. They were just very small, one-off characters. It was just an honor to have been cast by Andrea Romano, who was the voice director on those all the Batman series. Yeah, she was such a champion of mine, and she's the one that I first met when I did my general audition at Hanna-Barbera back in 1985. And she was just such a great friend and a great champion of mine, and would often bring me in on so many of her projects. And so she brought me in on the Batman stuff. And one of the coolest things about those things, of course, not only the fact that I got to work with Kevin Conroy and Seth Green and meet some of these, great people, Mark Hamill, but I got a Batman jacket out of it. So
Wait.
I got this great Batman, what do they call it? Like a Letterman jacket,
Yeah.
the felt body with the leather sleeves and the big Batman logo on the back of it and stuff, and my name on it with I think maybe even my character name. I don't remember, but anyway, so yeah, that was pretty cool.
I remember like I was watching Batman on Amazon and then I paused at one moment and I just saw your name Townsend Coleman as like as thug number one or something. I was like, wait a minute, Jason Whittaker's in this.
Yeah, did you say thug number one?
Or
That is so
something.
right, exactly. We would have been like additional voices, but they actually gave you a name, thug number one. I
Yeah.
think I played a character named Maury in one of them. Yeah, those are fun. You got to also understand that back in those days, like back in the 80s and 90s and stuff, because people will say, "Hey, I saw your name in the credits for Captain Planet or, some show.
Yeah.
And what did you play on that?" And I go, to be honest, I couldn't even begin to tell you because the way it worked, and it was probably some little one-line character in one episode, but my name would end up in the credits, excuse me, for the entire season because the way they did it is they didn't want to redo the credits for every single episode. So what they did was they put anybody who was in any of the episodes in that season in the credits for every episode of that season. So it made it look like you were a series regular on this show. So yeah, I looked like I was series regular on a whole lot of shows, I imagine back in those days, but that's because that's how that happened. It's like you'll see my name in the credits of, some shows like, not shows, but features like Sing, or what was the other one I did?
Was it
Anyway.
the Grinch?
Oh, no, it was The Grinch. Yeah. So,
Whoa, good
so you
job.
like, yeah, so you see my name in the credits for The Grinch and for Sing, but it'll just say additional voices, right? Because I was in the loop group for those things. The way loop groups work is they have, let's say there were four of us, four guys and four women who are the loop group. And the loop group is usually a group of sometimes four, sometimes eight, sometimes six group of actors who will provide all the like afterwards, group scenes where you have like a whole bunch of people, milling around in an airport. It's a crowd scene or something like that. So you fill in all that sort of background stuff. But then there will also be very small little incidental characters in that particular feature who will have one line. Okay, so let's say it's a male character. They'll have all four of us guys step up to the mic individually and do that character as we would do it. And then the producers will choose after all that recording has been done, which guy they like the best for that character. And then that character ends up being that actor's voice. Okay, so people would say, they'd see Sing, for instance, or Grinch, and say, "Hey, what character did you play in Sing? We love that movie." And I would have to say, I don't actually know because first of all, I've never seen it.
Wow.
So I've got to go back and watch it and watch for those characters that I know I read on and see if they actually used my voice on that character because I don't know. So that's how that works. So anyway, I'm giving you guys a little education about how voice acting and showbiz work.
I have a Jason question here.
Yes.
With the character Jillian, there seems to be like now there's like a romantic interest for Jason. What is your opinion as the actor playing that character? What are your thoughts on that ship? Are you like, yeah, sure, or like, well, it's not exactly what I had in mind for Jason?
Yeah, I mean, just as the actor, I would say I'd totally be on board with that. If that's the direction that the producers decide they want to go with that, totally be on board with that. If they decide that they're going to, do a left turn and go in a different direction, I'm on board with that too. I totally trust these people. They understand the history of Odyssey, and they also understand the trajectory of where they want Odyssey to go in the future. I don't. I feel like I'm just along for the ride. So, whatever they decide they want to do with Jason and Jillian is going to be just fine by me.
What was your favorite era to play Jason? Like, because Odyssey is so big that it has eras. You have the Jack and Jason leading but Zen era. You have the era where you're being a spy all over the world. What was your favorite era to play the character Jason?
Right off the bat, I'd have to say my adventurous spy era. Green Ring Conspiracy and Novacom and stuff like that. I really loved that because I felt like I got to do a lot more. Now I feel like I'm just the proprietor of J&J Antiques,
Oh,
sort of. Although I'm still getting, 28 hours was a lot of fun, and so I get to indulge a bit of that again. But I sort of feel like for whatever reason, they have kind of transitioned me out of that. And you got to understand also as actors pass away and they have to decide whether to try and replace that actor with another actor and keep the character going or simply to, do away with the character. As that happens, I feel like as I've gotten older, of course, I don't know how long they're going to keep Jason kind of as young as he is. I think I get the feeling they're sort of aging him up a little bit and wanting him to kind of settle down and move on and have to play a different role. I think they kind of want Jason to play a different role within Odyssey.
kind of like Jack Allen or something.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Well, who knows? Maybe the chairman might come up and you'll go launch into your spy career again.
The chairman, oh my good buddy Brian Cummings. Yeah, Brian was the voice of the chairman and so great.
What was your reaction to that character coming back?
The chairman, I thought it was great. It was like, whoa, man. And I think the fans dig that kind of stuff. I think the fan, right? Don't
Yes,
they?
absolutely.
Yeah. I think,
Yeah.
right. I think the fans love hearing stuff that it's kind of like what I was saying about Ninja Turtles. If you were younger, let's say you were 11 when you fell in love with Adventures in Odyssey, and that happened to be the era when the chairman, was kind of there, then he goes away and you don't hear from him. You love that character. And then he goes away and you don't hear from him for years. And then all of a sudden they bring him back. You're like, oh, wow. I mean, this reminds me of when I was 11. This is great. I loved this character. I'm so glad they brought him back.
How much time do you spend in a year in the booth recording Jason? Like how much of your year? Like, because I don't know how much time. I know.
No, back in the day, Tim, I would have said, I feel like I spend all day, every day in a booth in front of a microphone recording. Now, because I'm 71, all right? And like I said, I'm largely retired. And I do a lot of Comic-Cons, but I audition a little bit, okay? And each of my auditions takes probably 10 minutes. And it's the only time I'm in front of a microphone unless I'm doing an episode of Adventures in Odyssey. Because like I said, that's pretty much the only gig I still have going anymore and I'm actively doing. So yeah, so I would say, if over the course of a year, if I spend not in, let's say just auditions, if I spend 10 hours a year in front of the microphone, it's a lot. It's not that much. But now I'm talking about just auditions. With Odyssey, these are typically 4-hour sessions, and I do on average maybe 3 a year. Because they don't have Jason in that many shows anymore. So yeah, so you get the idea here. I'm not working. I don't have the headphones on in front of a microphone very often or for very long any longer.
Oh wow! So it's like a weekend a year you get to.
Right. I get to say, hey, this is my career. Woohoo.
No.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Tim. Thanks a lot for making me think of it like that. I really appreciate you, dude, so much. You got any more questions for me? No, 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 I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. I really am.
What is your favorite collectible that they've made based on whether it's a voice you've voiced over or a movie that you kind of worked on? Like, what's your favorite collectible or toy that you've seen based on your work?
All right, my favorite collectible is not going to be I think a collectible in the sense that you're thinking of a collectible like something you could go out and buy. My favorite collectibles are things that either fans have made me and they've made me some pretty amazing things over the years
That's
or
exactly where I was going. So you're
oh, okay,
perfect.
okay, dude. I wish I
Perfect.
had my fan made collectibles behind me because I actually carry them with me. I not all of them, but a good little portion of them with me to Comic Cons, and I lay them out as a little menagerie group, and it comprises probably about 20 or 25 pieces. Okay, so but they could be little cross stitch things that somebody has made me of, Michelangelo's head, or somebody sculpted me the Tick's head, which is a pin that they made me. Just stuff like that is really special to me.
Nice.
But I will tell you this, as much as I love the stuff that fans have made me, and I do, stuff that the creators of
Mm,
these things have made for me are just even more priceless in a way. Just having Kevin Eastman, draw Michelangelo Ninja Turtle original stuff for me. Kevin Eastman is one of the two co-creators of Ninja Turtles.
yeah.
Having Ben Edlund, the creator of the Tick, draw me, original art for me is beyond. But I'll tell you the one, and it popped immediately to mind when you started asking that question, is so I did the voice of, you ever remember the Where's Waldo books?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Oh, those were drawn by and created by a guy named Martin Hanford over in the
Yeah.
UK. And so I was blessed to be the voice of Waldo in the Where's Waldo cartoon series back in the early 90s. And Martin Hanford, completely unsolicited, drew. I wish I could run out of the studio and grab this right now and just show you because it's so amazing. But use your imagination. He drew, and it's probably about this big by maybe about that high. Just Waldo just standing there waving, right? And it's classic Waldo, and he's got a little inscription under it that just says basically, Townsend, thank you so much for your wonderful work. And then he signed it, Martin Hanford. And then he matted and framed this little drawing all by himself. Now I don't know, maybe he had his wife do it, or his daughter do it, or his assistant, but it was clearly hand done. He didn't send it out to a frame shop to have done. And when I got this thing in the mail, because I had no idea this was even coming, when I opened that thing, I burst into tears. I'm like, oh my gosh, look at Martin Hanford. You actually drew this thing for me. It was it was beyond. And so it has a really treasured spot on my bookshelf in my bedroom. That's like one of the most priceless prizes and treasures that I've ever gotten. So, and I've gotten stuff from fans that are pretty much just as priceless for all kinds of reasons, so yeah.
If you could perform as one biblical character, who would you want to be? If you could pick somebody out of the Bible and be like, I'm going to voice act this, who would you want to be?
Honestly, I'm going to say, and I hope this doesn't sound like bad, but I would say I would want to voice Jesus.
Mm.
Hey,
Yeah. I mean, I really would. Just think that would be fascinating, and seeing some of the stuff that they're doing, with biblical stuff right now, like like Chosen stuff like that is pretty cool to see. So yeah, that I think that kind of be the pinnacle, wouldn't it? I was
but
gonna say I could say Judas, but I really don't want to be Judas.
oh no.
Yeah. Although I did get to work with was on Odyssey. No, it was on a different biblical thing I was doing, but I got to work with Barry Dennen, who was Jesus in the movie Jesus Christ Superstar in the original film back in the 70s.
Wow.
He was Judas, and I remember meeting him for the first time, and again starstruck, because he was so impactful in that movie, but he was such a great guy in real life, So, but
Yeah.
no, I wouldn't want to be Judas. I'd rather be Jesus.
So I've been told that you live in a very adventurous life. by some of your.
Tim, I don't know who might have told you that, but they couldn't, it probably couldn't be more wrong. Why? So what's your question
It is like,
about
well,
that?
what are some of the adventurous things that you do? Because I've been told that you like do a lot of crazy like adventurous things, and then you come back and you're like, oh, it was nothing. It was nothing adventurous, but I did it.
I, so I'm guessing that maybe you might have heard that from Katie Lee or
Close. Well, it's
or
in the Odyssey family.
Paul McCusker or somebody.
It was Phil Lawler.
Phil Lawler. Okay. Yeah. Because we did a cruise for was it the 30th anniversary, I guess, of one of the anniversaries. I want to say 30th anniversary of Odyssey or 30th anniversary of Focus on the Family and something else. 25th anniversary of Odyssey, maybe. I don't remember. Anyway, but I can't believe, and if they see this and they go, you don't even remember what anniversary that was for Odyssey, I'm going to have to say, I'm feeling really brain dead right now and on the spot. But so on that cruise, we had these interactions with fans, and we had this Q&A thing where we were in this we were up on the stage in front of a bunch of fans, and we were doing this sort of kind of what's my line sort of thing. And we had to each of us submit something that we did, but it was submitted anonymously, right? And then the host would read, so who of these actors did this? And then the folks in the audience would have to guess which one of us they thought it was. So I'll just make this really as short as possible. So back when I was 19 years old, I went to visit my uncle in New York City. And because I was thinking about moving to New York City, this is during the summer between my freshman and sophomore years at college. And so I went to visit him, and he lived on Lexington Avenue, up just, blocks down from Harlem and up around 96th Street, I think, in this 12-story apartment building. And he lived on the 11th floor. And his apartment not only looked over Lexington Avenue, but the back of the apartment looked over what was basically a courtyard. This apartment was a square with a hole in the middle, right? And so the bedroom that I was staying in looked out over this courtyard, and I had a fan in the window, and I was leaving. So my uncle and his family had left. They were on vacation elsewhere, and I was just borrowing their apartment for this couple of days that I was there. So then I was leaving, and I wanted to check the mail for them on my way because I was all packed up, ready to go to the airport. I go down to the mailbox, and when I came back up, I realized that I locked myself out of the apartment. And
Oh no.
I had to get to the airport, and I had some time, but I needed to get to the airport, and it involved, taking a bus and a subway and a subway and a bus and yada, yada. So here I am locked out of this apartment. I don't have the keys. I don't know anybody who lives there. Certainly don't know the superintendent of the apartment, but I went down to the super's office and I explained my situation, and could he please let me into the apartment? Well, of course he wasn't going to do that because he didn't know who I was. I could be just some guy walking in off the street. Hey, could you let me into this apartment on the 11th floor? So I was desperate. And what I did, and when I look back on this, I still can't believe I did it, but it was one of the stupid adventurous things that I did. And I went up the stairs as far as I could go. And I realized that there was an entrance, a door that I could go to that was not locked, surprisingly enough. It went up to the rooftop of this building. So I go up to the roof of this building, and I'm walking around on the roof, and I realize, oh my gosh, there is an apartment up here actually on the roof that's a penthouse apartment to this building that I was not aware of. And so I started walking around, and then all of a sudden, these Doberman pinchers inside this apartment are barking their full heads off because they see me through the glass door. And I kind of freaked out, but nobody came to the door. So apparently the people who live there weren't there. Right. And so I looked around, and I'm desperate now. And I see this coiled up garden hose that's attached to a faucet. And I think, I wonder, now you got to understand too, that around the perimeter of this hole that goes down into this courtyard in the middle of this apartment building and around the outer edge, there's this iron fence that is maybe 3 feet high, 4 feet high, not very high. And so I think, I wonder if I take this garden hose and tie it around this iron fence, because I looked over the edge and I realized I can see the window that my bedroom was in that's got the fan in it. It's open. And if I can somehow scale down this brick wall past the 12th floor window, so I do this. So I tie it around the iron railing. In the other end, I tie this loop that I can get over my head and my arms up and through. So it's around underneath my armpits and I'm holding on to it
Yeah.
like this. And I go up and over the edge and I just start letting it kind of inch through my hands as I let myself down this wall as my nose is, like 6 inches from the brick, watching the bricks just go boink, 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 boink as I go down. And I go past this 12th floor apartment window and thinking, I hope no one's home and seeing me go down by their window. I hope none of the other apartments around this, because I'm going down, over the courtyard now, right? Not over Lexington Avenue. And I'm thinking, I'm just waiting for the cops to come and, come into this courtyard and, be pointing their guns up at me. Well, that never happened. And so I got down to the window where my fan is, this box fan's in the window. And now I'm just about to step onto the windowsill when I reach the end of this hose. And I can't quite get my toes onto this windowsill. And I
Oh
have to
no.
I have to start letting myself out of this hose loop that I'm on, which I do, and I get it over the back of me so I can let myself down. And now I'm arm's length like this, and I'm standing on this windowsill and I kick the fan inside the room. And then I have to let go of this hose with one hand and reach down and tuck underneath the window that's open. And then I have to let go with my other hand and reach around and loop it under the. So now I'm just standing on this thing with I'm hunched down now and I've got my arms in and my heart's beating like 9,000, miles an hour. And I was able to, get my feet in, sit down on the windowsill and pull myself in. I collapse on the floor of this bedroom and I could barely breathe. And all I thought was, okay, I'm in. Just close the window, put the fan on the floor and grab your stuff and go. So that's what I did. I just beat feet out of there and I was able to get to the airport in time. Barely made it, but got there. And that was my adventure. I will
Wow.
say the PS to this all was that when my uncle and his family got back home. So first of all, I can't believe nobody ever saw me, or if they did, they didn't call the cops, or if they called the cops came too late. Whatever. I never saw cops. And so I was able to get out there and get to the airport and make it home. And so that's that. But now cut to when my uncle and his family get back from their vacation, that garden hose was still, this was like just like a day or two later, that garden hose is still hanging down that they see the bottom of hanging outside their window, and they can't figure out why there's a garden hose hanging down there. And so I had to explain the whole thing to them. He couldn't believe that I was stupid enough to actually do that, and I can't either. I mean, you guys, I have to say some of the ridiculous risks I've taken in my life that I never should have and probably never should have lived through. It's just, yeah. But that's probably the most adventuresome that I get these days. I am not adventuresome at all. So let that be a lesson to you. Don't be an idiot.
But
Well, Townsend, how can we look up your work? Give us a
Uh,
few plugs.
So, dude, I've got no plugs for you because I don't have a website. This is how like non-involved I am with my business. But no, I don't have a website. I have got an IMDb page. I am rarely, and I hate to say this, but I'm rarely, if ever, on social media because I just think it's not that great for my mental health. So
Yep.
I have now come to the point. I got 4 kids and almost 8 grandchildren. I say almost because the eighth is on the way any day now. But
awesome.
so I used to, want to follow them. Well, they're largely not online anymore either because of what the internet has become and what not just the internet, but social media in particular has become. So yes, I have an Instagram page. It's IB Talkin, IBTALKN, no IN, but IBTALKN on Instagram and on Facebook too. But like I said, you won't find me there. You can find my pages there, but you won't find me there. So anyway,
Well, I'll give you this plug.
yeah.
80s, in my opinion, 80s cartoons are the best. 80s and 90s, best cartoons. So go check out Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Go
There we
check
go.
out Inspector Gadget. Those were like the best cartoons of all time.
Oh, thanks, buddy. Yeah, I appreciate that.
So there you go.
I've been fortunate enough to. This is Gobo from Fraggle Rock. Oh, Wembley.
Yeah, Fragile
Fine.
Fraggle Rock.
Yeah,
I forgot about that one.
Fraggle Rock. Yeah, he used to go exploring in outer space with his. I can't get it. Oh, look. Okay, hold on. Maybe this will do it. Yeah, he used to go exploring in outer space with his uncle traveling Matt, and then he'd come back and eat doozer sticks.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
yeah, so that's Wembley. That's Riot from Gem and the Holograms. That is the Tick back there. And don't count your weasels before they pop, dink. And of course, Michelangelo from Ninja Turtles. I was Usagi Yojimbo on Ninja Turtles, as well as the Rat King. This is Sentinel Prime from Transformers Animated. That's Jason Whittaker. Oh, you want to see something?
Wait. Oh, yes, please. I didn't know.
So I got these cool action figures of all these characters I played, but there is no action figure of Jason Whittaker, right? So Focus often sends me, the folks at Odyssey often send me cool Adventures in Odyssey stuff. And I don't know if you can tell what this is, but it's
Nice.
like a blockhead. You know, it's one of those things that's
Yeah.
cardboard and you cut it out and then you fold it together and stuff. Well, they sent me one of Jason Whittaker, and these glasses actually hide
Oh no. What?
his gorgeous blue eyes, right? So, but that's the only thing that even comes close to being maybe an action figure for Jason. So there's that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on the show. This is
My pleasure. You guys are delightful. I really appreciate it.
well, thank you. Thank you, Townsend. God bless you,
Yeah.
man.
Well, God bless you guys too. Yeah. Ciao.
All right,
Thanks.
cheers.
Thanks a million. Seriously.